Around the United States, there has been anti-transgender legislation spanning from bathroom bans to sporting bans for transgender teens. They are also gaining traction. Even in the state of Kansas, the Senate has passed an anti-transgender bill. According to a press release by the Human Rights Campaign, there have been 254 anti-LGBTQ bills throughout the state legislature in the country. SB 55 has been passed by the Republican-controlled Kansas Senate overnight. Though Governor Laura Kelly vetoed the bill, the issue is spanning throughout all 50 states.
We've expected anti-trans legislation for years. This is what they do. This is what right conservative things do. They don't like change, and that's literally what we do. And it's scary to doing that, still being trans and having the government actively oppress you. This legislation is expected, and it's frustrating and exhausting, and it's really, really harmful.
When similar legislation in North Carolina passed back in March of 2016, the NBA and the NCAA were both quick to move events they had scheduled to protest the legislation. Now in 2021, when 5 states have passed legislation or executive orders to limit the rights of transgender people, many corporations have not taken proactive action against those states.
Those organizations represent capitalism, right? And so typically when they make a statement, although we would like to believe that it is for some altruistic reason, I think that we can also be reminded that if it's going to affect the bottom line, they will be resistant to saying something. I think when money's on the line, it is not surprising that these major organizations don't make large-scale statements.
Lawmakers, historically, seem to have a real issue with people having control over their own bodies. They really want to regulate, how people present themselves or, how they, take care of themselves or what they do and don't want with their body.
Although in the state of Kansas, SB 55 was vetoed by the Democratic governor, the state of Arkansas has already passed legislation banning biological men from playing in women's sports and competitions.
And so it's really always looking back to seeing that all advocacy work comes together, because bodily autonomy affects women's rights, affects trans rights, affects LGBT rights, affects anti-racism, affects ableism. It all comes back together.
When we're talking about issues of social justice, when we're talking about issues of equity, we are also always talking about race. We are also always talking about ethnicity. We're talking about social justice issues, broadly speaking. I think there's a moment to recognize some of the tactics that are used when we see some of the legislators talking about the bill, right? And so not just how they talk about it, which I think is often through fear-mongering tactics, right? There are trans athletes all over the place. This is the idea that you see. There are trans athletes all over the place who are trying to infiltrate binaried sports. And the reality is that trans athletes have been playing sports for a long time. And the reality is that we're not seeing more news articles about greatest trans athlete of all time because they compete at the same levels as their cisgender counterparts.
Just because you are a trans person doesn't mean you owe people an explanation for your existence. You don't have to go around educating everyone just because you exist. That's not your job, and that's exhausting. People should educate themselves. Call up your representatives and be like, hey, why are you doing this? What makes you think this is okay? Say, I don't approve of this, and since you are my representative, you need to hear me.
At the end of the day, transgender people are people. This legislation, spearheaded by right-wing conservatives around the United States, is discriminatory. Rather than inclusion, they are looking for separation of people by pointing out differences rather than speaking about actual issues that are affecting Americans throughout the United States. Time will only tell if this legislation can cause corporations and the Biden administration to respond back against these bills and laws.